We have Artur Asaduriyan with us today. I was thinking about how to introduce him, and I was going to say, here's a guy who loves Jesus, is in ministry, his initials are AA, and he studied philosophy, and I was like, I'm describing myself. It's actually amazing how many things, and it's the same last name, both last names based on Asaduriyan as the core. So Asaduriyan, it's pretty crazy how many things we're lined up on. And then we married best friends, right? So our wives are long-time best friends. So it was meant to be. It's meant to be. What we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be doing a skeptic meets believer role play. That's basically what it is. I'm going to be playing the role of skeptic. Artur is going to be playing the role of believer, but he's not going to play a role. This is who he is. This is what he does. He's an apologist, and an apologist isn't somebody who apologizes, like says sorry to people. It goes to the historical meaning of that word. Apology is to give a defense. So someone who is an apologist spends their time studying how to defend the Christian faith and then going out there and actually doing it. So he'll tell you more in a second, but he has a YouTube page where he's talking about faith, he's talking about Christianity, he's talking about difficult questions on a regular basis, and you all can follow him there, you can learn from him there. But let's give him a round of applause and let me invite you up. So, Artur, can you start just by telling us about yourself a little bit?
Married to a woman named Aras, Lilith's longtime friend. And I have 4 children, 11, 9, 7, and a year and a half, which keeps our house really busy. Because we thought, you kind of think you're over that like child phase, and then you have a child. But except you have a lot of help now. You can delegate work to the kids. I'm involved in 2 different ministries. Well, 3 different ministries. I'm a teaching elder at my church. I am involved in a ministry called Young Life. So I'm the area director for Young Life in Glendale. I've been doing that for we're going on 3rd year. And then I run my apologetics ministry. It's not just a YouTube channel, though we do that. But it's a ministry, it's a holistic ministry in the sense of like showing up to churches, training people in apologetics. We have a base in Armenia. I moved my family to Armenia in 2019. And we were there for a year and a half, training up people in apologetics. There's a guy mentor over there, and he trains other people. He just got accepted to get his master's degree in religious studies to one of the universities in Armenia, and he also does YouTube content only in Armenian, apologetics material. No one else does it. We're the only people that create apologetics only material in Armenian. So if you got parents, grandparents, cousins, or whatever like that, and you're like, man, I wonder, I would like this information to get to them in Armenian. Yeah, check it out, spread it out. So,
can you tell us more about the ministry? What's it called?
It's called Apologia Center. The heart of the ministry is, again, to train people in apologetics. But it's also eventually what we would like to do is develop centers of dialogue and learning between Christians and non-Christians. Kind of like a think tank where people get together, sit down, and they just dialogue or read books together and discuss them. So that's the heart for why we call it center.
And how can they access all the stuff that you do?
Apologiacenter.org. The YouTube channel, Instagram, sadly, TikTok. Really don't like that app. And yeah, awesome. We have an event coming up on October 10. We have an apologetics event coming up on October 10. I've invited 2 of my friends that are involved within the apologetics world. Both of them have pretty decent YouTube followings. Russan KD, for those who know Russan. Anybody know who Russan is? He knows who Russan is. Great. So Russan's coming, and then David Wood, Dr. David Wood, who specifically does apologetics, Christian apologetics towards Muslims. And he's been doing it for a very long time. Anybody here read the book Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus by Nabil Qureshi. David Wood led Nabil to the Lord. Portion of the book is about David because they were roommates over a 2-year period of time. So, David's coming down.
Okay, so tell us a few things about yourself. Like outside of family, outside of work and ministry, what are the 3 things that excite you most or occupy your attention the most?
Are you assuming you know the answer? You're just drawing it out of me?
No, I'm interested.
Wow. So outside of all that ministry stuff, the thing that relaxes me the most is probably watching soccer. I'm a humongous Liverpool fan. So
Let me comment on that real quick.
was that? Yes! That's right.
Let me comment on that real quick, just a footnote that there's important soccer-related news coming up at the end of this session, so stay tuned. Go ahead.
Wow. Okay.
There's some things over there that may have to do with it. But.
I wasn't at the competition because I was on a work trip. So if I was there, it might have been different. I also like playing soccer quite a bit. That relaxes me. That's when I can just turn off my mind for however long I'm playing. Just be in that. I love spending time with my kids, man.
Awesome. Okay, with no further ado, let's get rolling. So how this is going to work is, imagine that, Artur is doing his apologetics work on YouTube. A random person comes across the work he's doing, gets interested, and basically tells him, I want to meet up. I don't believe in the stuff you're saying, but I'm interested and I have questions. So I'm just going to start asking Artur some questions, and maybe after each 5 to 10 minutes of going on a topic, we'll turn to you all for a moment and see if you have questions you want to ask Artur, or if you want advice from him on how to approach an apologetic situation like that. That's the format. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to go into the role of skeptic, and let's get rolling.
Go for it.
Charlie Kirk was assassinated. It's a big deal. I feel bad for him. I feel bad for his family, but I've been watching videos and he's really spewing some hate. He's saying all this messed up stuff toward trans people. And I'm wondering if you're like that too. You're a Christian, are you anti-trans too?
So I take notes generally when I have conversations with people so that I'm not interrupting them. So I got a couple of questions that are very important. For this conversation to actually be productive and move into a space where we're both kind of talking the same language, I think we need to clarify terms. Okay. So you said a couple of things I've just jotted down that stood out to me. Number 1, hate, the trans question, and am I anti-trans? How do you define hate is very important to this conversation. And then what do you mean by anti-trans?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can try to define my terms a little bit. I'll start with the hate part. I don't know if I have some amazing definition of hate, but what I'm seeing from him is he's just attacking people. These people aren't bothering him. They're just trying to live their life. They're trying to be trans and enjoy their life as trans. And he's going into their lives, showing up on a campus, and he's just calling them out. Why would you do that? Why won't you just let them live their life and be comfortable? Do you want me to define trans too, or you want to talk on that?
No, I don't need you to define trans. I want you to define anti-trans.
Okay. Anti-trans. It's kind of similar to what I said about hate. These people are, they're born at some point, whether it's when they're born or when they're growing up, they start feeling a certain way. They're born in the wrong body and they feel different than other people that they see that might be boys or girls, and they want to shift over. Charlie Kirk, he was just against that. He's trying to stop people from doing that when that's what's going to be most comfortable for them. That's what's going to make them happy. So that's what it means to be anti-trans. It's to be against that. It's to try to stop that. It's to speak against that. It's to hate on that. And I'm just wondering if being a Christian doesn't mean I have to be one of those people, one of those haters, one of those anti-trans people.
Okay, can we agree on that when we call people out for whatever it is that we agree or disagree with them, predominantly disagree with them, can we agree that that's not necessarily out of hate? And that's not necessarily a hateful thing to do? And the example of that would be, like, you're calling out Charlie Kirk or people like him. Does that mean you hate them? So, like, would it be fair if I was like, hey, you're calling out Christians, are you anti-Christian? Like, according to your own definition.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, I don't think I'm anti-Christian. I definitely have issues with Christians, and I disagree with Christians. I guess what I'm seeing, like, with Charlie Kirk is he was tough about it. He was on the offensive. He was trying to change people, you know? Like, I disagree with you, but you're a Christian, do your thing. Like, I don't want to change you. I'm not anti-you. I just disagree.
Yeah, I would say, again, like, not an apologist for Charlie Kirk, right? I mean, I could still say he's a brother in the Lord, and that he had chosen to live his life out a certain way, and that being engaging in kind of the big hot button issues of the day from his Christian worldview. And so he intentionally put himself in situations where that's the dialogue. I wouldn't say like every single Christian should do it that way. I definitely wouldn't say that. But I don't think like your evaluation of the situation is fair.
Okay, what's unfair?
So like calling him hateful because he's putting himself in a situation where he's having conversations with individuals, and that subject comes up. Clearly there's a disagreement there. And now part of it is that he's going to live out of it through his worldview, right? So his worldview is a Christian worldview, and that has like societal implications. And so one of those is like asking questions like, what would lead to the flourishing of like society best? And does the Bible have anything to say about this? Does Christianity have to say anything about this? And so he's not living out of hate. His disagreement is, hey, I think society would be better this way. Now what you're saying is, no, I think society would be this way, which is the opposite of what he's doing. And I think you're completely in your right to do that. I mean, that's what it means to live in a democratic society where we have open dialogue. What I wouldn't say is that he's somehow hateful or he's anti fill in the blank, whatever that might be, that he's disagreeing about.
Yeah, I guess you have a point. I have a worldview too, and he has his. That's what he's talking from. I get that. But he's trying to change people. Like, I guess if I have a worldview, my thing is like, just stay in your lane. Let people live the way they want. Let them think the way they want, and like stop making all of this tension.
Okay, so I see a problem with that statement, and I don't know whether you see it as well. Okay, so the statement is that my worldview is you just let people live in their own lane, whatever it is that they believe, live in that way. But this entire conversation's about you disagreeing with someone who's living out their worldview.
It's because you guys keep coming in my lane. You keep coming in other people's lanes, you know? Like, I'm trying to be in my lane, and then these Christians are like coming in and they're like telling me how to drive in my lane.
Yeah, well, that's a part of the Christian worldview, that we are to evangelize, we are to share our view, because we believe certain things are true and certain things are false. And before you kind of get on the whole Christian thing is, you do that too. You believe certain things are true.
I let people live their lives. You know, I'm not anti anybody.
Well, it depends on your definition, right? Because if I went with your definition, you're anti-Christian. You just can't get away from this.
You're saying that I'm in your lane, and I'm telling you how to drive in your lane?
Well, you're saying that Charlie Kirk shouldn't have done the stuff that he was doing. And so therefore you're going into his lane.
That's interesting. Let me just come back to the trans thing for a sec. Like, just as a Christian, Like, what do you think? Like, are you against these people? Are you trying to change them like Kirk was?
Okay, so I think there's people that have gender dysphoria. Okay, I think there's people who have like identity issues. As a matter of fact, I think all human beings have identity issues. So we're all trying to like figure all this stuff out. What I would say is that there's a biblical standard that's given in regards to how God's created humanity. Now, the Bible also teaches that we live in a world where there's a fallen world. We live in a world where there's sin, and sin results in all sorts of issues. And some of those things could be, say, gender identity issues, where it's away from the norm of God's intent. So I don't want to stand there and say people are faking it. I think that's dishonest. Okay? And I think it's false. I don't think people are faking it. I think people generally have gender dysphoria. They're uncomfortable in their own bodies. Okay? Now, what does that come from? I'm not sure where that comes from. We can maybe sit here and talk all night about the 1,000 reasons. Maybe it can come out because of a defense mechanism, because someone was abused. Maybe it's genetic. It could be any number of things. I just think sin has impacted in the world in such a way where we should expect those things. Okay? But that's a bit different than the moral question I think we're asking. So the world is the way it is. So for example, I believe that God's created human beings for a monogamous married relationship, right?
Like, you think everybody needs to get married?
No, I don't think Jesus wasn't married.
Okay.
The guy who lived the most like human life ever wasn't married. And I think the Bible actually teaches that some people are called to a life of singleness. As a matter of fact, Jesus spoke about something that I think is very interesting and could be related to whether it's a trans issue or the gay issue. And it's this conversation about eunuchs in the Bible. And I'll just paraphrase it for you, okay? And it's some people are eunuchs because of the way like nature's made them. Some people are eunuchs because God's called them to be eunuchs. And some people are eunuchs because other people have decided they're going to become eunuchs. Okay. Now, eunuchs were individuals who guarded queens and princesses, and so therefore there was no sexual relationships they were allowed to have. Okay. And I'm not going to get into the details of how eunuchs were made. So we get three categories. There's something about nature there. There's something about human beings making a decision. And then there's something about God calling people to a certain kind of life, which, commonly Christians say like the gift of singleness or something. Like, it's a celibate life, essentially.
Are you saying, like, trans people, you're saying they have gender dysphoria, we don't know where it comes from, but, like, they should just stay single? Is that your point?
Yeah, I would say that, because I don't think marriage completes people, like, into, like, more the image of God or something like that. You can live a very full and complete life in Christ being a single individual.
That's interesting.
And so I think there's individuals, so like I've come across folks and I have friends who have same-sex attractions. And those attractions aren't going away, right? They don't sin in that. They're not in relationships with the same sex. But they're not also attracted to the opposite sex. And so they've decided to live a life of celibacy and singleness.
I got one last question for you on this. So whether it's gay people or it's trans people, are you saying that your God, like the Christian God, requires people to like resist these things inside them? Like, if you're attracted to the same sex, you're supposed to just never be with someone in your life. If you're trans and you want to like change your body and your identity, you're supposed to just stay uncomfortable your whole life. Like, this God wants people to be uncomfortable and unhappy?
Well, we call that a hasty generalization.
Never heard of it.
Okay, yeah. You might try taking a philosophy 101 class. and informal logical fallacies. Look them up, ChatGPT. So the kind of this issue of therefore you're unhappy, I think is not true. And let me come at this in a different way. Something maybe we all struggle with to a certain extent. I think all human beings go through jealousy. I think all of us probably at moments have rage and anger. Would you say it's okay for me just to act out on those feelings and thoughts?
No, of course not.
Okay. For multiple reasons, we would agree, right? Now, that might mean one of the reasons is we're harming other people. One of the reasons is we're not good for society. It's not good for ourselves. Like we're harming ourselves to a certain extent. And so this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of this idea of human flourishing. What's best for humanity? And you agree with certain moral ideals. I agree with moral ideals. I don't think the options are God says, just be unhappy. Yes, God tells us to control our urges, but it's not only for a select group of people. God tells us to control ourselves on anything that's beyond what his intention for human beings are.
So, hold up. Are you saying it's the best thing for a gay person not to be in a gay relationship?
Yeah.
Explain that one. Like,
I would say it's the best thing for a guy not to have 5 wives either. Right? It just like, if we're going into like the morals and ethics of sexuality, there's plenty of things. I think it's bad for people to watch pornography. I think it's because it's harmful to society, including themselves and others, in regards to like objectifying people. So like, we're a hypersexualized culture, specifically in the West and in the United States, I would say. And so we need to kind of dial it back a little bit and realize that human living is not just about sex. I know like we can't buy burgers without being confronted by some kind of sexual ad, and that should tell you enough. Sex sells, we're just being thrown this stuff all the time. And here's one thing that maybe might help, and I'll give you a reference here. There's a book recently written in the last like 3-4 years, called Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World.
Who's that by?
Tom Holland, not Spider-Man.
But he's British
He's a
too,
historian.
right?
He's
Aren't
a
they
British,
both British?
Yes. And he's not a Christian. He says he's atheist agnostic. And one of the things he says in the book that I think is very interesting, he says, he's a Greco-Roman historian, which is very important to this. He says that the Greco-Roman culture was all about like indulgence of like sexuality. And said what Christianity brought to the world is telling people you can control your urges. You don't have to act like that. You have the freedom and the power and the authority to control your body. And this is a spoiler maybe, but the way he ends the book is, he says, I'm afraid we're going back to the Greco-Roman world at the loss of Christianity and Christian influence in culture. And I think there's something to be said there in regards to how we're shaping our societies and what that's going to look like in regards to, is it actually leading to human flourishing? Are we getting better? Is our society more free when we're just telling people, hey, you feel it? Just go on and act on it. Because you don't have any control over yourself. And I'm saying what God's called us to, specifically within Christianity, is no, every human being has the ability to control themselves by God giving them a will, right? And then every Christian has an escape from the rulership of sin that's in Christ if they give their lives to Jesus and follow him.
All right, let's pause the conversation there. I want to open it up to you all. What questions do you have for Arthur, either on the topic or about how he was approaching having the conversation? Just raise your hand and I'll call on you.
By the way, this hasn't been rehearsed for some people who've been like thinking about this. We've intentionally kept each other like in the dark about what we're gonna say. So he doesn't know what I'm saying. I don't know what he's saying. So
Daniel.
I liked when Artur brought up a tough topic. You didn't immediately shoot him down. You worked your way through it. Little by little, and understanding what his question, what his objection was.
So I'm going to throw out a lot of book recommendations. Okay, you don't have to go read all of them or buy them and stuff. Sometimes people tell me their spouses are mad at them because they keep buying books that I keep recommending. But Greg Koukl has a book called Tactics. It's not a hard read, and it's not that long. But that book will teach you how to have conversations with people. So if you notice the beginning stages of the whole conversation, I ask them clarifying questions. What do you mean by this? Define your terms, right? So that's like one of the first stages of having a proper conversation. Is I'm not going to assume to know what you mean. I'm going to ask you clarifying questions. The two that I would say, what do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion? Which leads to like really fun conversations, and no one's yelling at each other.
Anybody else?
Yes. So it seems like so far it's the individual at this coffee shop or whatever has an experience that's vicarious at best, and you're discussing ideas. How might you change things if you're discussing this with a person who, let's say, is same-sex attracted, or let's say they're, I don't know, sister, brother, or they themselves are trans. So not just an idea anymore that you're discussing, but
Yeah.
a person.
Since Charlie Kirk was like the way this conversation got going, there's a really cool video of Charlie Kirk online where somebody comes up and is trans and says, hey, I'm kind of confused and thinking through this stuff. And Charlie says, well, tell me your story. That's the way he begins the conversation. And I think that's a brilliant way to start a conversation when somebody tells you, I'm struggling with X, whatever that may be, is to say, tell me your story. Because everybody doesn't come at the issues we have in life and whatever it may be from the same kind of road. So you're not supposed to deal with everyone like cookie cutter kind of template answers. It's not the point of it. I mean, this requires quite a bit of listening and thinking. And I can't even tell you how I would navigate a conversation like that. But I know at one point or another I would be like, hey, why don't you tell me your story? Like what's happened, you know? And then hear them out and then react to it that way. Another thing that's important in this conversation, notice I didn't like make the entire conversation about defending Charlie Kirk. Because I probably don't agree with all the stuff Charlie Kirk says and the way he navigates conversations. I happen to agree on a lot of the way he's done it, but not all of it. There's stuff that he's said and I said, you know, I wouldn't have gone at it from that direction. And so my goal as a Christian is not to defend other Christians, it's to defend the gospel. That's very different things.
Let's keep rolling.
Oh, did you want to go back?
Follow-up question then, because you said defend the gospel. Let me throw a scenario at you. I'm a parent, I don't actually have kids, but I'm a parent, I have kids back to school night, I walk into a public school classroom and I see the trans flag hanging. I say, you know what, we're not okay with this, we're Christians, we might pull our student out. And then this trans person pulls out scripture, obviously they would probably misuse it. To your mind, what are the top 2 or 3 bits of scripture that somebody might misuse in that context? That's one.
So the top one that probably comes to my mind is, doesn't the Bible say don't judge and you're being judgmental? This is the most overused. No, the Bible doesn't say don't judge. The Bible says when you judge righteously and know that the standards you use to judge are going to be used against you. That's a proper understanding of that. But that's something that will probably come up. Like Christians are seen as these judgmental individuals. The only, maybe another thing they might bring up is, you know, the Bible was written during a certain time period and the world's changed, so we view things differently now. This is completely false, by the way. Like in regards to how the Greco-Roman culture viewed sexuality and the way they went about it. I mean, Nero married a young boy and dressed up like a woman. So this was this sort of identity issues were alive during the time the Bible's being written, and the biblical authors and the early Christians dealt with this stuff. So don't fall for stuff like that. Like, society's changing. Like, go actually look back and see the sort of stuff people practiced back then. I mean, I would say we're actually way better because of the Christian influence than they were 2,000 years ago.
So I asked that to set up this follow-up question, and it's for both of your guys' experience.
Can I, as much as I appreciate the follow-up, is it okay if I cut it off so we can keep going into the night? Just because we set up a few topics, and right now it's looking like we're going to do trans for an hour. Which is fine, but I want to hit some other topics that other people might be interested in here. But thank you for participating. Those were really good questions. All right, back into our roles. So when you were talking to me about this trans stuff, you started appealing to the Bible, you started appealing to Jesus. I mean, these things were written thousands of years ago, right? Like, you agree with that? It's thousands of years old.
Yeah.
So this stuff was written thousands of years ago. What we have today, it's like a mistranslation of a mistranslation of a mistranslation. So, like, we don't even know what the original writings in the Bible said. I mean, that's got to be true, so why are you leaning on that so much and basing your life on that?
Are you familiar of, like, how Bible translations and transmission works and has worked?
I mean, no.
I'll give you a story. Okay, let me share a story. This was fun. I was in New Jersey at a pretty, like, top-notch engineering school, and so I carry an Armenian Bible with me sometimes, just for the heck of it, just to show white people, because they're like, wow, that looks foreign, and it's like amazing. But there's also another point of it, and the reason is because people, I think, make claims like this without knowing how this works. So I met this gentleman, and he said something like this: when King James translated the Bible, he changed a bunch of the stuff in the Bible. And I knew at that point that this guy didn't know anything about, like, how Bible translations and translations work.
That was about to be my next point.
And historical stuff. Like, King James didn't translate the Bible himself. Okay? He commissioned a group of scholars to translate it. And I asked him, I said, hey, I said King James didn't translate the Bible himself. Scholars did it. He said, yeah, but nonetheless they changed it and stuff. And I pulled out my Armenian Bible. And I said, look, I come from a people group where we had a 5th century translation of the Bible. And it's very easy to show if the King James changed anything. Because we got an old one, and you compare it, and you'll see if anything's been changed. So we have older manuscripts. And here's the point. He said, man, that's really good. I just said that because one of my professors said that. I'm just repeating it. And I said, well, your professor's wrong.
Okay, I see a flaw in what you're saying.
Okay.
So all you're telling me is that when you go from the Armenian Bible in the 5th century all the way to the King James Bible in what century? Is that like 12, 13, 14, 15, 1600s? Okay, so we go from 500 to 1600. For 1100 years, there wasn't any big mistranslations. But 5th century, we're talking about like the 400s at that point. So like it's been, 400 whatever years since Jesus. That's like way older than the United States. There could be a lot of mistranslations in there.
Yeah. Well, what I didn't tell you is that we have Greek and Syriac and Latin translations for the first 500 years of the Bible.
And these go back like all the way to
look,
Jesus, or
so now you got to be careful here, because we can talk about the New Testament, we can talk about the Old Testament. If we're talking Old Testament, the oldest manuscripts we have in our hands are probably the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are dated to like about 200 BC. Okay, and we have complete scrolls. As a matter of fact, until the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947-48, the oldest Hebrew text we had of the Old Testament was from 1000 AD. And when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we did a comparison to see if anything had been changed. And guess what? Nothing did change.
Like nothing at all?
No, nothing. There's linguistic stuff we might not know like what the meaning of the word is. So what ends up happening in those cases, they get like transliterated. Okay?
How's that even possible? Because like, my mom tells my aunt one thing, by the time my grandma talks about it, it's like a whole different thing.
Well, yeah, I would say because your mom and your aunt and your grandma aren't trained scribes who dedicated their entire lives for the copying and transmission of something they think is the holiest thing that they'll ever come across.
That's fair.
Right. So if we talk about the New Testament, so the oldest piece of a manuscript that we have is dated from like 125. Typically, scholars will say 125 AD. I'm being a little generous here and go 125 to 175 AD. It's a little portion out of the Gospel of John. And for whatever we have matches up with it. Now, even if that wasn't the case, we can actually compile about 98% of the New Testament just from the quotations of the early church fathers. From the 2nd to like, say, the 4th century. Because these people wrote letters to churches and friends, and they quoted from the Bible, specifically the New Testament, often. So even if we didn't have any manuscripts, we'd be able to compile this. And the 2% we're looking at is that we wouldn't have, doesn't even make like doctrinal difference. So transcribing is very important. So now let me say this always comes up. Have you heard of, say, Socrates? Because we had this whole...
Yeah, I have.
Did Socrates write anything down?
I don't know.
Socrates didn't write anything down. So, the student of Socrates who wrote the things that's attributed to Socrates down, named Plato. Okay? Now, what's the earliest manuscript we have of the writings of Plato? To the time period he lived?
No.
Like 700 years.
Wow.
Okay, how many copies do we have of it? 49. Last I checked. I'll be generous. 100. Like, no one in their right mind, in any philosophy department or history department that you walk into, says, you know what, we can't trust the Republic. We can't trust the writings of Plato. Now, what scholars will do is talk about, hey, maybe some of Plato's thinking is bleeding into the text here.
I gotta cut you off. I gotta cut you off. Because, like, no one really cares if the manuscripts or whatever we have from Plato and Socrates are actually accurate. Because, like, it's philosophy. It's interesting to read. It makes you think. But when we're talking about God and Jesus, like we were just discussing, like, you're trying to point to this stuff to change how I live. You're trying to point to this stuff to change how the trans person lives, how the gay person lives. You're trying to, like, use this to really make some points in society and government and all this stuff and my private personal life. So I don't think what you're saying is very helpful. Like, so what if Plato wasn't accurate on that? But if Jesus isn't accurate about gay people, like, that really changes my friend's life.
Yeah, so we have to be fair here in regards to the question you asked and what you just said now. There's a big difference between asking whether Jesus is right about something versus you asking me a question about whether the text has been changed. Okay, so let's focus on the matter at hand is whether the Bible's been changed and is an unreliable source. And that's why the conversation about Plato matters. Because if we can trust documents that are written, the earliest copies we have are 700 years after the guy existed. And nobody has an issue. If we can trust documents like Alexander the Great, the earliest documents we have are like 300 years later, then you have to trust the documents that not only are earlier to the source that they're talking about.
Okay, that's a good point.
But also have way more copies. So when we're looking at the New Testament, we're looking at 4,000 plus manuscripts. And they're geographically apart. They're separate geographically. So you're looking stuff in Egypt, you're looking at things in India. And these are agreeing with one another. And so very important, how we feel about a thing, what our psychological reaction is to what Jesus says or what Paul says is a completely different kind of question, and we can talk about that. But that's not the conversation about, is the text trustworthy or not?
Yeah.
And that's what you brought up.
Okay, let me go elsewhere, because you can tell this is what I was already interested in. Let's just say I agree with you. The Old Testament, they wrote it down, and we have exactly what they wrote down. The New Testament, they wrote it down. We have exactly what they wrote down. It hasn't been corrupted. It hasn't been mistranslated. Even in that case, there's some messed up stuff in the Bible. I like the stuff where you're not supposed to judge. I like the stuff where you're supposed to love people. But then there's places where God is destroying whole groups of people and women and children. There's places where God is putting these crazy rules on people. You don't believe that stuff, right? You reject that stuff. You accept the good stuff.
Depends what you mean by accept the good stuff and the bad stuff. I think we'll get more clarity on it as we talk about it. But before we go there, why do you like all the good stuff?
Me?
Yeah.
It's just obvious. As a human being, I came out of the womb, my mom was holding me and loving me, and you just learn immediately that this is the good stuff, and the bad stuff is when I'm not getting food and I'm getting spanked, and you slowly grow up and you learn what's good. And what kind of question is that? What's good, what's bad. If God is coming in and destroying a bunch of women and children, that's bad.
Yeah.
But it's good when Jesus is you should love one another. That's obvious.
Yeah, so I'm not fully in agreement that it's obvious. And neither is the historical data, whether it's obvious. So the ancient Romans had a practice where if they didn't want a child, they left them outside to the elements and they would die. And that seemed pretty obvious to them. That's just the way the society's set up. You would say that's horrendous, to just leave your child outside to die.
You're telling me that my views on what's good and bad and right and wrong it's just I'm brainwashed by my society or something?
No, I'm just saying you find yourself in a society in which the Christian worldview has permeated and influenced for 2,000 years. And you believe things, and I think rightly so, by the way. You believe things but you're not acknowledging their source. And it's Christianity that's influenced you to think compassion is a good thing. Maybe not entirely, but definitely a great deal. Because there were countries and societies where that wasn't a given. It wasn't a given to help the poor person. As a matter of fact, we have places in the world right now where you're not supposed to help poor people. Because they're being punished for evils they've committed in a past life.
So I'm hearing what you're saying, but I'm a little confused now. Is God confused? Is God struggling to make up his mind? Because is he for the good stuff? Or is he also for the bad stuff? Because he's doing both in the same book.
Yes, he is. And this is why we need to all learn how to read the Bible. Just because we know how to read doesn't mean we know how to read the Bible. Or anything for that matter, right? Because the way you read a newspaper is not the way you read a novel, and that's not the way you read a philosophy book.
Okay, so how am I supposed to read the Bible?
Well,
How's that gonna answer your
anything
question?
else, you study how to study the books in the Bible, which are different genres. And so that's generally one of the most important things I would say is, do you know what you're reading? Somebody said, well, I'm reading the Bible. Yeah, but if you're reading the book of Psalms, that's poetry. You're going to get highly symbolic language in there. And because you're reading music, you're reading poetry and the expression of the human heart, which is very different from reading one of the letters of Paul to the churches, which is very different than reading the Torah. And here's why. Because within the Bible, one of the things is that God has what we would call a covenantal relationship with people. A covenant is a contract. Okay? As a matter of fact, the Bible is separated into two major sections: New Testament, Old Testament, which means New Covenant and Old Covenant, which immediately tells you there's an older way God dealt with things, and there's a new way God dealt with things. And within the scope of the Old Covenant, which is that there, God is establishing a relationship with a nation state. And the laws and the rules you're seeing in the Old Testament are predominantly given to the state. So that's the federal government and what they're called to do as a governmental system within their society. Where the good things you're talking about predominantly, you're going to see in the New Testament, but those are more on a personal, ethical level because it's about the relationship the individual Christian has.
Okay, so that Old Testament stuff, the stuff that bothers me and I see as bad, was like specific to Israel, and the things I like are like for all individuals. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, I would say so. Like generalizing. I don't want to get into like nitty-gritties of it, but that's absolutely true. You have specific commands God's given, and it's for a specific time and location and people, where you have other things that are universally based.
But wasn't God still like God back then? You know, like how could he be commanding like kill all these people if he's the same God? You know, like I understand that the covenant changes and you got nations, you got individuals, but how could the same God be like so tough at one time and like commanding killing at one time, and then later he's like love everyone?
Well, yeah, look, I think in the New Testament, God's still going to judge and come back. I don't want to dismiss the fact that God's still going to judge the world. That's biblically taught.
Like he's still going to want people to die?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a judgment that's going to come upon the world in the end of time. That's part of Christian doctrine.
That's like a New Testament thing?
Yeah. It's like Jesus coming back on a horse and all that stuff.
But like people made that up after Jesus, right? That's not like a Jesus thing. Like Jesus was preaching like love and peace.
No, Jesus spoke about the end of times.
What did he say? What did he say about it?
Judgment. So there's a number of passages. I mean, if you want specifically, you might want to read Matthew 24 and Luke 21, where he speaks about the judgment that's going to come on both Israel and the world. But I don't want to dismiss the Old Testament kind of conversation. Okay? And here's the question. I don't think God is arbitrarily saying, kill these people. If he was, I would agree with you that would be immoral. Because I believe God to be a moral being, and his goodness and his morality flows out of his person.
Like, so now you're saying that it was like a good thing for God to say kill the women and the children?
Let's ask the question. Why is God telling the Israelites to go into the land and say to kill the people there?
I don't know, to be honest, I've never read it, I just heard about it.
Well, but yeah. So predominantly it's because of the behavior and the actions of the people groups there.
Like even the 3-year-olds.
Well, it's very interesting because you get a societal kind of judgment happening. But I would say, there's like 3 things I want to say to you right now. So there's the literature you got to pay attention to. There's the societal interaction, Israel interacting to the opponents, okay? And then the commands being given by God and the things that they're doing. So Israel's commanded to go and basically offer peace to these people and essentially repentance. And if they don't do that and they pick up swords to fight and so on and so forth, that's when the fighting comes on. So this is like a proper understanding. The literature aspect of it, that some scholars have argued, a guy named Paul Copan has done quite a bit of research on this. He's written 3 different books. Did God really command genocide? Is God a moral monster? And is God a vindictive bully? Okay. So Paul Copan has done quite a bit of research on ancient war language that we see extra biblically amongst the Babylonians and the Assyrians, where the Bible is employing. For example, the kicking out of the land, the total annihilation and destruction of everyone, male, female, children, animals, and all that. And one of the interesting things that you see in the Bible is you'll get a command, and they'll go in there and they'll say like they killed all the people, and then like 2 chapters later those same people are still around. And people don't pay attention to this. Like, what happened? Well, it seems like they didn't kill anyone. There's something else happening here. So, specifically, Paul Copan's thesis is that this is driving out language. It's driving them out of the land because of their behavior and the things that they've been doing. Now, one of the things that the people in the land have been doing that I think is very important, and I'd like to get your opinion on, like how we should react to something like this, is a practice called child sacrifice, where the people groups in the land of Canaan would sacrifice their children to one of their gods named Molech. They would literally throw their children into the furnace to be burned. And that gets brought up by God in the text of the Bible, that they're being judged for their heinous acts. And that's just one of them.
Okay,
Like, I don't know what you think we should do as a society if Mexico is doing something like that.
No, that makes sense. I understand. Like, if Mexico is doing that, we would probably be like, we got to send a team in to do something about it. I get that, but what I'm struggling with is, how is God going to solve them killing their babies by Israel and going in and like killing everyone, including the babies?
Yeah, and again, that's where I was saying the literature of it is the war language literature. I don't think that's necessarily happening. I think there's a driving out. I think
so it's like I'm reading it, you're saying I'm reading it wrong. Like I'm reading it literally, when actually if I understood what that meant when it was written at that time, it wouldn't mean what I'm thinking today.
Yes.
Okay, let's pause
Yeah,
this conversation.
okay, so let me finish.
But yeah,
this
get
thought.
your last thought.
So we have very similar language like this, by the way. For those of us who are sports fans, we'll say things like, man, my team demolished this team. It's not meant to be taken literally. I mean, if somebody 400 years later is reading, you write, hey, my team demolished your team, and they're like, man, that was a cruel sport. What is your, like, that's a misread. I think sometimes we're doing that.
Super interesting.
By the way, this is one of the hardest questions.
You're welcome.
I struggle with this regularly. And so I don't think there is a complete answer to this question. I think we have kind of the research, specifically Paul Copan's done, probably the last 10 years of his life is dedicated to this research. And so we can draw upon that stuff. I think there's internal evidence in the text of the Bible that that's not what they're doing. Because we keep seeing these people groups pop back up. Like, Caleb is not Jewish. He's one of these people. And he's rewarded in the land. He gets to be a part of, he has his own tribe. He like becomes an Israelite. The warriors of David are not all Israelites. So they're all around. Which begs the question to ask and say, what? I thought they were supposed to have just wiped everyone out.
All right, are there any questions out there? Again, either on the topic or like where you're curious about Arthur's methods and you have questions about that. Yeah, Hadar.
Since we're talking about translations, I hear a lot of noise about King Hezekiah's age, like between Chronicles and Kings. Like one is saying he started reigning when he was 42, and the other one is saying he started reigning when he was 22. So from my perspective, how would I defend it is like the 42 refers to the lineage of King Hezekiah. The other response would be like he ruled 2 times. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, by the way, there's not like a bunch, but there's definitely stuff like this predominantly in the Old Testament, where numbers are off, right? And even discrepancies between who killed who. Like, go look it up, who killed Saul? Is it his shield bearer? Is it some guy that shows up and kind of like finishes off the job, and then goes and tells David, I killed him, and then David kills that guy. Definitely the number stuff is there. I would just put that to textual mistakes, even though I think there are some of those things. It's just I would have to study the text specifically in question and see what's going on. But I do think there are scribal mistakes in the Bibles we have today. And we know what they are. There's no question about it. Like, scholars are very aware of when, like, we can give New Testament examples of, like, oh, the earliest manuscripts we have don't have this text. And any one of your English Bibles you open up is going to have a footnote saying, the ending of Mark, the longer ending of Mark. It's like, oh, these aren't the oldest manuscripts we have, but we're going to keep it in our texts because we have a lot of manuscripts that have them. But we're going to let the reader know they're not in the oldest manuscripts we have. So that's generally, if I study it and there's no kind of reasonable answer, I would say that. And that doesn't bother our view of inspiration, okay, or infallibility. Because typically when Christians speak about this, within specifically a Protestant context, I would say, like an evangelical Protestant context, is that we're talking about the inspiration is the inspiration of the original authors on the original text. We're open to there being mistakes. I'll give you a really good example, and I love bringing this example up because it always trips people out. Okay, like, what's Satan's name?
Lucifer.
Wrong. Like, society thinks Satan's name is Lucifer. It's like everywhere. And I go, show me where that is in the Bible. Open up your Bibles, show me where it is. Yes.
Isn't it in the Apocrypha?
Nope. It's Isaiah chapter 14. Now, if you have a Bible with you and you open up to chapter 14 of Isaiah, if it's not a King James Bible, you will not find Lucifer in there. It's not in the text of your Bible. It's only in the King James Version. Right? And it's a transliteration. What your Bibles will probably say is something like son of the dawn or son of the morning. Okay, bright morning star. Morning star is another translation of this. Not bright and morning star. In the New Testament, Jesus is called the bright and morning star.
Revelation.
Right? Yeah. So, what's going on? Why does the King James Bible have that? Well, because it's a Latin translation of a Greek text that was translated from the Hebrew, and the reference is to the planet Venus. It's Hesperus in I say that right? I think so. In Greek. Right? And we have Akkadian writings that make similar kind of it has to do with royalty. When you read the text, this is a taunt against the king of Babylon, Isaiah 14. Beautiful passage right away. And then somehow it became a proper name. Like people walk around thinking, Satan's got a name and his name is Lucifer. So again, it's not in the original language. It's in the Latin. That's the first time we see it come about. And would it be fair for me to say that our Bibles have mistakes in that? Yeah, I would say the King James Bible has a mistake in it. Because there is no proper name.
I think we should start wrapping up. I don't think we're going to have time to do a full-on back and forth on another question. But because this is a big question for everybody, I just want to ask, what is your take on what's called the problem of evil? Just the fact that Christians say God is all-powerful. They say that he's loving. So if he's all-powerful and he's loving, why doesn't he stop bad things from happening? Like family members of ours from getting sick, or loved ones from dying, or wars from occurring. Why doesn't God stop those things if he loves us so much and he can do something about it?
Okay, so there's a major assumption in this question. Okay, now you guys have to track with me because if you misunderstand me, you're going to think I'm a heretic. Okay, so I'm not. What I'm saying is Orthodox Christian response to this stuff. The assumption you have in there is, number one, that God has the ability to stop it, okay, in regards to the way he set up the world. Now, I think there are things God cannot do. And that's not Artur's opinion. This is the traditional way we define what it means for God to be all-powerful. Typically, when we hear someone say God is all-powerful, we think people are saying God can do anything he wants. That's not true. What we mean is God can do anything that's logically possible to be done. And there are logical impossibilities.
A friend of mine told me that he stopped believing in God and the idea of God because someone told him, can God microwave a burrito so hot that he can't eat it?
Right.
And when he thought about it, he's like, oh, if God can do everything, but it's impossible to make a microwave so hot, a burrito so hot that you can't eat it, that means like God doesn't exist. And he lost his faith over that.
Yeah, and look, I tend to be harsh with certain things. I blame the church. I blame, as someone who's in ministry, I blame pastors. I blame church leaders for not articulating proper Christian doctrine for our young people. I mean, look, the numbers are, people who grew up in the church, when they go off to college, 8 out of 10 of them walk away from the faith. That tells me there's something wrong in the church. Like, I don't sit there and go, oh, the bad university professors are leading our kids away. Maybe. Say, I don't know, 4 of them, it's that. But what about the other 4? That means we're not equipping our people properly. When they are in those situations, they have an actually good response. So, that's a nonsensical question, right? Can God create a square circle? It's philosophy 101 class. Your professor throws it your way, everybody comes out, they're like, I don't know if I exist, man. You know. I heard a guy talking one time, and he said, he gave a talk and a similar sort of thing like this, and a lady got up and said, oh, you keep talking about this stuff, but we don't really know if we exist. And the guy said, okay, let's just go with that. Can I ask you who's asking the question if you don't know if you exist? Right? And laughter. Like, if you don't know if you exist or you don't exist, what are you doing? Interacting here. Right? And so some of these things are just like so contradictory. And God can't stop existing. God can't create a rock so large he himself cannot carry, it, or a burrito he cannot eat. And that assumes a bunch of stuff about God having a body and, you know.
Even liking burritos. It even assumes he likes burritos.
Yeah, I know. So there are things God can do, logically impossible things. Now, why do I say that? Because if God set up the world in a certain way, could God have created all robots? Yeah, there's no question about it. But that world would not have certain things. Chief amongst them, love. Meaning those robots that he created wouldn't be able to love each other, and they definitely wouldn't be able to love him. Because love assumes a certain kind of freedom within it. Right? So like this, you gotta be vulnerable. You gotta you choose to be loved. You open yourself up. And you have to actually give that as well. Like, be loved and be loving towards the individual in front of you. And I think God chose to bring about the kind of world that he has with love being a part of it. Because God's not interested, and remember this, please. God is not interested in people just giving mental assent to his existence. That, like, God sitting there and going, oh, you just said I exist? I feel so much better about myself. Thank you. That's not what God's about. The Christian God that we see in the pages of the Bible is interested in people coming into a loving relationship with him. A transparent giving and taking. They receive love from God and they give love to God. Not because God needs the love, but because that's proper relationship. And so if that's the kind of world God's created, which I think it is, then that means people have the freedom not to love. And that's where the problem of evil comes into play. Adam and Eve, the first sin of humanity is essentially telling God, we don't need you, we'll take care of it ourselves. You have a way you want us to live, we sort of disagree with that way, we're going to do it ourselves. And so they choose to push God away in this harmonious, loving relationship, and that results in them having issues with each other, and now they have issues with God. And then we see that immediately. Two brothers kill each other. And then the Bible just has situations where that decision leads to all the other brokenness that we see. But I like bringing this question back to, we don't believe in a God that's disconnected. Maybe other religions do. This is why it's important to ask people questions. Because if somebody, for example, has a concept of God that's coming from Islam, we don't conceptualize God the same way. And so I want to ask questions. We have an image of God within Christianity where he's not disconnected to human suffering. That the God who created the universe, and the pages of the Bible tell us that it is for him, by him, and through him that all things exist and maintain their existence, became a human being, Lord himself, Philippians 2, Lord himself became a human being like you and I, fully human, and suffered at the hands of puny little people. And I think Jesus says it, right? He says, look, if I wanted to, I could ask my Father and have legions of angels come and take care of this whole situation. But I'm willingly sacrificing myself. This is a part of the whole plan. So we have a God who became a man and suffered and overcame the suffering and evil of humanity so that we don't suffer. Right? So, oh, death, where is your sting? That's the reason there is no sting. But let me just give you some advice. Everything I just said is like proper textbook response to the problem of evil. If somebody's going through suffering in the moment, and they tell you things like, where is God? Don't do what I just did. You're going to make the situation worse. Just sit there and listen to them and cry with them. And maybe 6 months later, you can have this discussion. There's two situations in my life that have just been like, let me say one and the other one happened today. There was a girl that was coming to our church, and she essentially said, hey, my little cousin got run over by a car. And her little cousin got run over by the grandmother backing out of the driveway. Kid ran out, grandma didn't see him, drove over him. And she said, can we go? My family's at the hospital, can we go pray for the family and stuff? And my first child, my son, Avo, had just been born, was about 2 years old. I walked into this emergency room, and this little 2-year-old kid is hooked up to all sorts of machines his heart's beating with the machine and his lungs and stuff like that. And I just broke down. That's not the moment you sit there and give the problem of evil response. That's a moment that means you weep and you cry. Because Jesus told us to weep with those who are weeping and rejoice with those who are rejoicing. You're not going to fix that situation by giving a philosophical response to these things. My friend's dad, I'm his best man, just passed away yesterday, completely unexpectedly, just on his couch, 62 years old. And his father-in-law passed away 3 weeks ago. And we got a text today, and I was just like, what do you do? And this guy's a Christian. Right? And so I called him up, and I was like, how are you feeling? What's going on? And he explained, and he cried, and I cried. And nothing was fixed. Because that's what that means sometimes. And I'm telling you, sometimes you will do way more ministry in answering questions by just being present with people who are suffering. Okay, there's a time and a place for answering the problem of evil. Like we can write papers on it and whatever, have fun discussions over it, or have discussions when somebody's gone through the mourning process. Like be wise enough not to bring it up in the moment when somebody's going through it, man. Because there's issues in life where we practically do not have answers, because sometimes people will look at you and say, like, you're the only Christian I know, or you're like the religious leader in my life, and I want you to tell me why. And you don't have an answer. We don't have an answer because we're not God. Maybe we can guess at answers, but we really don't have an answer. And it's okay in those moments to say, brother, I'm hurting with you, I love you, and I don't have an answer to this question. And I don't have an answer to a lot of other questions. Like, that's okay. So be wise.
Let's thank Arthur. Thanks for coming. Yeah, we only did like 2.5 questions.
Too
6 more
short.
questions.
Yeah,
Let's
so
be like 3 hours next time.
hopefully this is one
Oh.
in a series and we can do this again.
I say a couple of things. There's 2 guys in my life. I haven't led many people to the Lord, like ironically that I do this. And at this point, I just kind of look at it and say, I look at it and I say, God, I don't know, maybe you just want me to like plant and water and other people get to harvest, which I'm completely fine with, by the way. I know a guy who just finds himself in the most random situations leading people to the Lord. Like, he recently put up a picture of him in the ocean in Florida in a suit, baptizing someone. And he was like, oh, I led this guy to the Lord, like sitting at a restaurant, and he was like baptizing me. And like it happens to him on airplanes and Ubers and stuff. Like, he's amazing. The Lord just brings people to this guy. And if that's what he's gifted in, and it seems like it is, I rejoice over him doing that. I don't see that happen very often in my life. But there's a lot of like removing weeds and watering and planting and stuff like that. And I've led 2 guys to the Lord that I know of, where for one of them, it took about 2 years of me meeting with them every Friday for about 3 hours. Just to give you the scope of this. This guy came into my office, and he was an atheist when he came into my office. And man, there was a time where I was like, is it going to happen, Lord? I just kept praying because he had all the evidence. He was actually convinced of the resurrection. He's like, yeah, the resurrection happened. When he told me that, I was like, okay, are you ready to accept Jesus? He's like, no. I just want to live my life because I know what Christianity means.
Wow.
Like, at least you're honest.
Yeah.
Right? And then maybe last year he called me up and said, hey brother, I'm going to this church, I'm getting baptized this Sunday, would you please come? And that was just beautiful to see. Another guy was a combination effort, but this guy came on my YouTube channel. He lives in England. And he came on my YouTube channel because I debated an atheist guy on that guy's channel. And he came in there guns blazing trying to argue with me. And then I told him, hey man, what's your name? Before I argue with you. And I said, you live in England, do you have a favorite soccer team? And he said, yeah, he's an Arsenal fan. And I was like, yeah, second place always. But, and I joked over that, and we became really good friends. And throughout that period of time, one of the things, brilliant guy, has a graduate degree in philosophy. And he texted me at one point, he said, Arthur, I don't think I've been fair with the arguments that are for Christianity, because they seem to be a lot stronger. And then he said, and the arguments that I thought were stronger aren't as strong. And he went through this period of time, and I told him to read C.S. I actually told him to listen to C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. And he listened to it in one sitting. And then he texted me and he said, I think I'm ready to become a Christian.
That's crazy.
But that was like a year and a half of interacting with this guy. And he's a believer now, and it's really cool because other people have been involved in his life, and the Lord did some really awesome stuff. Like he started having these dreams and stuff like that.
Wait, so is your point longer is better and we should just go for 4 hours tonight?
What I'm saying is the questions that we have set in place, I don't know what you guys have to do. I got family to get to, but don't expect to have one conversation with people and it's done. I would just say always create opportunities to meet again with someone. And one of the best ways to do that is if someone asks you a question you don't know the answer to, say, I don't know. Can we meet next week? I'll research the answer and then come. And that's just an opportunity to have another conversation. But it takes time, guys. Right? Like if we want to see things grow and bear fruit, like any tree, this is the same exact way.
Well, let's definitely do this again. Thank you so much, Arthur.